In the heart of the grand Lutheri Empire, where towering spires touched the sky and shimmering cities floated above oceans of liquid silver, Princess Silera sat alone on a balcony. The cool evening breeze carried the scent of exotic flowers, but she could not see them. She could only feel the gentle petals between her fingers. Silera was blind from birth, a rarity among her people. The Lutheri, one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, valued perfection. Their rulers were expected to be flawless in every way, physically, intellectually, and genetically. But Silera, the only daughter of Emperor Vexer, was seen as broken. She had heard the whispers all her life. A blind princess. How can she rule? She is weak, unfit for the throne. Even among the Galactic Council, her name was spoken with pity or scorn. It did not matter that she was intelligent, kind, and well-versed in diplomacy. It did not matter that she could hear subtle shifts in a person's voice, detecting emotions others missed. In the eyes of the galaxy, she was a failure. And now, no one would marry her. The Emperor had spent years searching for a suitable match. Noblemen from different planets, powerful leaders from allied worlds, none of them wanted a blind bride. They masked their rejection with excuses. It would not be wise. She deserved someone special. But the truth was simple. They did not see value in her. Tonight, the Emperor had called another gathering, inviting suitors from across the galaxy. Silera sat quietly, listening to the voices rising from the grand hall below. The Lutheri Palace was filled with shimmering light, the sound of clinking glasses, and the murmurs of alien dignitaries. She did not need sight to know what was happening. She could imagine the nobles whispering, trading polite words while avoiding her name. The doors to her balcony slid open with a soft hum. A familiar presence stepped forward. Her father. Silera, Emperor Vexer said, his deep voice carefully controlled. Come inside. The guests are waiting. She stood gracefully, her fingers brushing the edge of the railing before turning toward the door. A Lutheri attendant placed a guiding hand on her arm, but she waved him away. I can walk myself, she said calmly. She had memorized the palace halls long ago. As she entered the grand hall, the voices dimmed. She could feel the weight of 100 eyes on her. She stood tall, her violet-hued skin glowing under the palace lights, her silver-white hair flowing like silk. She wore the royal crest of the Lutheri Empire on her gown, a symbol of power, one that many believed she did not deserve. One by one, the suitors stepped forward. She recognized their voices, their rehearsed greetings. They spoke of duty, of honor, but their words lacked warmth. They were here only for political gain. Then, another voice spoke, one unlike the others. Princess Silera, it's a pleasure to meet you. A human. The room grew silent. Silera tilted her head slightly, listening. The voice was strong, but not forceful, warm, but not condescending. He did not speak like the others, who either pitied or dismissed her. Captain Elias Grant, the human, introduced himself. A human. Here, it was unheard of. The Lutheri sought humans as newcomers to the galactic stage. Ambitious, unpredictable, and still proving themselves. Yet here he was, standing among nobles and rulers, offering himself as a suitor. Emperor Vexer's voice was cold. You are no noble, Captain. What gives you the right to speak here? Silera heard no fear in Elias's voice when he answered. Respectfully, Your Majesty, the right to speak is granted to any who are willing to stand before you. Unless the Lutheri Empire now fears words. A murmur rippled through the hall. A human challenging an emperor. Unthinkable. Silera allowed herself a small smile. You speak boldly, Captain. Few would dare. Elias chuckled. I've learned that sometimes the boldest words come from those who have the most to lose. Interesting. He did not lower his voice when addressing her, nor did he hesitate. He spoke to her as an equal. And why have you come? She asked. Elias hesitated for only a moment before answering. Because I heard the whispers. The ones who say you're unworthy. The ones who dismiss you without knowing you. I don't believe in such nonsense. The room tensed. The nobles shifted uncomfortably. Silara was quiet for a long moment. You know I am blind. Yes. Yes, Elias said simply. And yet, you see more than most people in this room. She did not expect that answer. The Emperor spoke sharply. Captain Grant, a human cannot marry a Lutheri princess. Your kind has no place in our traditions. Elias met the Emperor's gaze. Then perhaps it's time for a new tradition. Gasps filled the hall. Silara remained silent, considering the man who had just disrupted an entire royal gathering. A human, standing alone, facing a room full of rulers who saw him as nothing. She found herself intrigued. For the first time in years, someone had not spoken about her weakness, but her strength. Maybe, just maybe, this human was worth knowing. The royal gathering was unlike anything Elias Grant had ever experienced. Towering crystalline pillars lined the grand hall, glowing softly with an inner light, and the air was thick with the scent of exotic spices. The nobles of the Lutheri Empire, dressed in shimmering robes, observed him with a mix of curiosity and disdain. Humans were not common in such places, especially not standing before an emperor, especially not as a potential suitor to a princess no one else wanted. Elias met the emperor's gaze without flinching. I came here because I heard the truth, Your Majesty. No one in the galaxy wishes to marry your daughter. Not because she is unworthy, but because they are blind to her value. A wave of murmurs passed through the gathered nobles. Some whispered in amusement, others in shock. Emperor Vexer's golden eyes narrowed. And what makes you different, Captain Grant? You are not Lutheri. You have no noble blood. Do you seek wealth? Power? His voice carried the weight of a ruler who had no patience for foolishness. Elias shook his head. I seek neither. He turned his attention to Silara, who had been silent until now. I only seek to know the person everyone else has chosen to ignore. Silara tilted her head slightly, listening. His voice was steady, unwavering. He did not sound like the other suitors, who spoke to impress, who measured every word to avoid offending. There was no pity in his tone, no hidden insult masked by politeness. For the first time in her life, someone had offered not to judge her, but to know her. The Emperor exhaled sharply. Humans do not understand our ways. A marriage is not a mere contract. It is a bond of alliance, of responsibility. Why should I trust you to stand beside my daughter? Elias didn't hesitate. Because unlike the rest of this room, I am not afraid of what she lacks. His voice rang clear, cutting through the tension. I see what she can be. Silence fell over the hall. The nobles had dismissed Silara for years, whispering behind her back, calling her unfit. Yet here was a human, a species considered new to the galactic stage, challenging their beliefs without fear. Silara turned toward Elias, curiosity flickering in her mind. And what do you see in me, Captain? Elias took a step forward, ignoring the scandalized looks from the nobles. I see a princess who has spent her life listening to the whispers of others, but never had the chance to prove them wrong. I see someone who understands more than anyone in this room, because she hears what they refuse to say. Silara's fingers twitched slightly at her sides. He was right. She had heard the hidden truths in people's voices all her life. Deception, fear, ambition. But no one had ever asked her what she wanted. The Emperor's voice was cold. You speak boldly, Captain, but words mean little here. If you truly wish to prove yourself, then you must earn the right. A chill passed through the room. Silara already knew what her father meant. The trial of worthiness, she whispered. Elias raised an eyebrow. Trial. The Emperor nodded. Every suitor who seeks the hand of a Lutheri princess must face a test, a series of challenges to prove their strength, intelligence, and devotion. His voice was firm. You will compete against others, and if you fail, you will leave this palace in disgrace. Silara expected Elias to hesitate. to reconsider, like all the others before him. Instead, he smiled. Sounds fair. Another murmur ran through the crowd. Some nobles scoffed. A human, standing against the finest warriors and diplomats of the Lutheri Empire. Impossible. Silara's lips parted slightly. You accept so easily. Elias shrugged. Why not? If the test is about proving my worth, then I have nothing to lose. The Emperor's expression remained unreadable. Very well, Captain Grant. The trial begins at dawn. The gathered nobles bowed as the Emperor turned to leave. One by one, the guests departed, their voices filled with quiet amusement. No human had ever attempted the trial of worthiness. Silara remained standing, her thoughts swirling. She could sense Elias still beside her. You are either very brave, she said softly, or very foolish. Elias grinned. I hear that a lot. She considered him for a moment. You do not fear failure. Failure doesn't scare me, Elias said, not trying at all. Now that would be a regret. Silara was silent. His words were simple, yet they carried a weight she did not expect. For years, she had been told she was weak, that she was not worthy, that she would never rule. But here was a human who didn't see her blindness as a flaw, who didn't assume she was helpless, who was willing to risk everything, not for power, but simply to try. For the first time in a long while, Silara felt something unfamiliar. Hope. She turned toward Elias. Then I suppose I shall see what you are capable of, Captain. Elias chuckled. I look forward to it, Your Highness. As the night faded and dawn approached, the Empire whispered of the foolish human who had challenged tradition. But Silara, for the first time, she wanted to believe in something more. The sun rose over the Lutheri capital, casting a golden glow over the palace. The time had come for the trial of worthiness, a test no human had ever attempted before. Elias Grant stood in the open courtyard, stretching his arms as he looked around. Towering stone pillars surrounded the training ground, their smooth surfaces reflecting the morning light. The ground beneath his feet was a polished black stone, cold and unforgiving. A small crowd had gathered, nobles, warriors, and scholars, all curious to see how a human would fare in a trial designed for the best of the Lutheri. Most were already whispering about his inevitable failure. Silara stood nearby, listening intently. She could not see the trial, but she could hear the way people spoke about Elias. A human will never pass. He doesn't understand our ways. This will be over quickly. She had heard these words before. Not about Elias, but about herself. The Emperor sat upon his throne, his expression unreadable. Captain Grant, you stand before the Empire to prove your worth. The trial consists of 3 challenges: intellect, strategy, and endurance. If you fail even one, you will be disqualified. Elias nodded. Understood. The Emperor motioned to an elder scholar. The first trial was about to begin. The trial of intellect. The scholar placed a large, intricate puzzle sphere before Elias. It was made of interlocking metallic rings, shifting and moving in complex patterns. The challenge was simple: unlock the sphere in less than 10 minutes. The other suitors had practiced with such puzzles since childhood, but Elias, he had never even seen one before. The Lutheri nobles smirked as he studied the object, expecting him to fumble. But Elias had something they didn't: experience in problem-solving. Instead of panicking, he ran his fingers over the sphere, feeling for hidden mechanisms. He had worked with alien technology before, fixing damaged ship components, bypassing security locks. His hands knew how to listen. Click. The first ring shifted. Click. Another piece slid into place. The crowd murmured as Elias worked faster. He wasn't thinking like a Lutheri noble. He was thinking like an engineer. With 3 minutes to spare, the sphere clicked open. Gasps filled the air. Even the Emperor raised an eyebrow. Elias smirked and set the open sphere down. Next, the trial of strategy. The large, circular holographic board appeared before Elias and his opponent, a high-ranking Lutheri tactician. The challenge was a strategy game called Path of the Stars, where players commanded fleets, built alliances, and outmaneuvered opponents. Elias had never played before. "Captain," Silera spoke softly beside him, "the game is about patience. If you rush, you will lose." He nodded. "Got it." The game began. The Lutheri tactician played aggressively, expanding his territory quickly. It was a common strategy: intimidate the opponent, push them into a corner. But Elias had seen this before. He had played similar war games with his crew. Instead of reacting immediately, he waited. He let his opponent overextend, stretching his forces too thin. Then, in one brilliant counterattack, Elias trapped half of the enemy fleet in a pincer move, cutting off supply lines. The game ended in Elias's victory. The crowd erupted in disbelief. Silera smiled. She had expected him to lose, but he had done something remarkable. He had adapted. The Emperor leaned forward slightly. "You continue to surprise me, Captain Grant." Elias gave a small bow. "I do my best, Your Majesty." The trial of endurance. The final challenge took place in the Arena of Winds, a vast circular pit filled with shifting platforms, strong gusts of artificial wind, and hovering energy barriers. The goal was simple: stay standing for 5 minutes. The Lutheri suitors were built for this. They had trained for years in high-speed combat, balancing perfectly even in harsh conditions. Elias, not so much. As soon as the trial began, the winds struck hard. The platforms tilted at impossible angles. The first Lutheri competitor leaped across them effortlessly, landing with perfect control. Elias nearly slipped on the first step. The crowd laughed. Silera clenched her fists. "Do not try to match them, Captain. Use your own way." Elias steadied himself. Instead of fighting the wind, he flowed with it. Instead of making high leaps, he used low, controlled movements. He crouched, adjusting his balance. 1 minute. He dodged a shifting barrier, using his instincts instead of sight. 2 minutes. The wind pushed harder, but he lowered his center of gravity. 3 minutes. The other suitors were moving fast, but Elias, he focused only on staying on his feet. 4 minutes. The final gust came, powerful enough to send even Lutheri warriors stumbling. Elias gritted his teeth, planting his boots firmly. 5 minutes. The alarm rang. He had done it. The arena fell into stunned silence. The human had not fallen. Silara's heart raced. For the first time, a suitor had proven himself, not because of strength, but because of adaptability. The Emperor rose from his seat. His voice was calm, but his words were clear. "Captain Elias Grant, you have passed the trial of worthiness." The nobles were speechless. Elias wiped sweat from his forehead and grinned. That wasn't so bad. Silera laughed softly. For the first time in her life, she felt something she never thought possible: hope. The grand hall of the Lutheri palace was quieter than usual. The nobles who once mocked Elias now watched him with cautious eyes. The human had done the impossible. He had passed the trial of worthiness. Yet, even as the Emperor acknowledged Elias's success, an uneasy feeling settled over the court. Something was wrong. Silera could sense it. She stood beside Elias, her hands resting at her sides. Though she could not see, she had spent her life listening. To voices, to whispers, to the truths hidden beneath words. And right now, she heard something troubling. Low murmurs, uneasy shuffling of feet, the subtle tension in the air. Someone was not happy that Elias had passed the trial. A warning in the shadows. Later that evening, Elias found himself walking through the palace gardens. The cool breeze carried the faint scent of star lilies, and above, the twin moons of Luthar shone brightly. Silera joined him, her steps light. She walked with confidence, despite her lack of sight. "You surprised them today," she said softly. Elias smirked. "I get that a lot. They don't know what to do with you," she continued. "You were supposed to fail. The nobles expected it." He glanced at her, but I didn't. Scilara tilted her head slightly. "No, and that's why you're in danger." Elias stopped walking. "Danger?" She nodded. "Someone doesn't want you here, Elias. Someone powerful." He frowned. "Who?" Before Scilara could answer, a figure stepped out from the shadows. It was an old Lutheri noble, his silver robes shimmering under the moonlight. His face was partially hidden by a deep hood, but Elias could see the sharp golden eyes underneath. "You do not belong here, human," the old noble said, his voice smooth and cold. Elias folded his arms. "Funny. I just passed the trial of worthiness. Seems like I earned my place." The noble exhaled sharply. "Do not mistake passing a test for acceptance." He took a step closer. "You are an outsider, a disruptor. You do not understand our ways." Elias met his gaze. "Then why don't you explain it to me?" The noble's lip curled slightly. "The princess was never meant to marry. Her blindness is a weakness, a liability to the empire. If you stay, you threaten the balance we have carefully maintained." Elias's fists clenched. "You mean you don't want her to rule?" Scilara turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. The noble chuckled. "You are quick, Captain Grant, but not quick enough." He reached into his robes and tossed something onto the ground, a small metal device, humming with energy. Before Elias could react, the device activated. A high-frequency sound burst into the air. It was sharp, nearly inaudible to human ears, but Elias still felt it in his skull, like a pressure wave pushing against his brain. Scilara staggered backward, her hands clutching her head. Elias's eyes widened. "It's affecting her more than me." The noble took a step forward. "Leave now, Captain Grant, or next time, it will not be a warning." Elias lunged, but before he could grab the noble, the man pressed a small switch on his wrist. The device deactivated. The sound stopped, and the noble disappeared into the shadows. Secrets revealed. Elias quickly turned to Scilara. She was breathing heavily, recovering from the strange device's effects. "Are you okay?" he asked, steadying her. She nodded slowly. "I will be." Elias frowned. "What was that thing?" Scilara's fingers tightened slightly. "A sonar disruptor. It scrambles sound waves, completely disorienting my senses." Elias cursed under his breath. "So someone really doesn't want me here." Scilara exhaled. "Not just you. Us." She turned toward him, her expression serious. "Elias, I think this is bigger than a marriage dispute. Someone is working to keep me off the throne." Elias's eyes narrowed. "And they were expecting you to stay silent." She nodded. "But now, they know you're helping me." He smirked. "Good. I like making trouble for the right people." Scilara's lips twitched in amusement. "Then you may have just made a very powerful enemy." Elias shrugged. "Wouldn't be my first time." She tilted her head. "You should leave while you still can." Elias shook his head. "Not happening." Scilara hesitated. "Why?" He looked at her seriously. "Because I didn't come here for power or politics. I came here because you deserve a chance, and I don't run when things get dangerous." For a long moment, Scilara was silent. No one had ever stood beside her like this. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Then we must find out who is behind this." Elias grinned. "Now that's a plan I can get behind." The search begins. By morning, the palace was back to its usual routine. But Elias and Scilara were no longer just playing the roles expected of them. They had a mission now. Elias spent the day carefully watching the nobles, listening to their conversations, looking for anything suspicious. Scilara used her keen hearing to catch whispers others ignored. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge. Mentions of hidden meetings, references to old traditions, and one name kept appearing again and again: Chancellor Overus, a powerful noble, a trusted advisor to the emperor, and possibly the man who wanted Silara gone. Elias exhaled. Well, looks like we found our prime suspect. Silara turned toward him. Now the question is, how do we stop him? Elias smirked. Oh, I have a few ideas. As the sun set over the Lutheri capital, the real game was about to begin. Elias knew the battle wasn't over. He had won a small victory by staying in the palace, but Chancellor Overus wouldn't give up so easily. The old noble had too much to lose, and when powerful men got desperate, they became dangerous. Silara walked beside Elias through the palace gardens, her steps light and graceful. The stars above shimmered in the deep violet sky, casting a soft glow over the marble pathways. You humiliated Overus today, Silara murmured. Elias smirked. Good. She sighed. It won't stop him. He will find another way. Elias nodded. Yeah, but so will we. Just then, a palace guard approached them, bowing respectfully. Captain Grant, Princess Silara, the guard said. The Emperor has requested your presence in the royal hall. It is urgent. Elias and Silara exchanged a glance. Urgent. Something was wrong. The accusation. The royal hall was filled with nobles when Elias and Silara arrived. The Emperor sat on his throne, his face unreadable. Overus stood beside him, his expression calm. But Elias could see the satisfaction in his eyes. A group of palace guards stood at attention, their weapons at their sides. Elias's instincts immediately went on high alert. Something was very, very wrong. The Emperor spoke, his voice heavy. Captain Elias Grant, you have been accused of treason. The words hit Elias like a shockwave. Treason, he repeated. That's ridiculous. Overus stepped forward, holding up a small metallic data chip. This was discovered in your quarters, he said smoothly. It contains restricted military intelligence, classified information about the Lutheri Empire's fleet movements. Gasps filled the room. Elias's eyes narrowed. I've never seen that before in my life. Overus sighed dramatically. A convenient excuse. Silara stepped forward. This is a setup, she said firmly. Overus gave her a small smile. Princess, I understand your desire to protect this human, but the evidence is clear. He turned to the Emperor. Your Majesty, the punishment for treason is banishment, or execution. Elias clenched his fists. He could see what was happening. Overus had set a trap. And now, Elias was caught in it. The desperate escape. Elias knew he had seconds to act before the guards arrested him. He glanced at Silara. She gave the slightest nod. She understood. Time to move. Before anyone could react, Elias lunged forward. He grabbed a decorative staff from the wall and swung it, knocking over two guards. Chaos erupted in the hall. Silara turned toward the Emperor. Father, you cannot let them take him. The Emperor hesitated. He did not fully trust Overus, but the evidence was overwhelming. Elias didn't wait to see what the Emperor would decide. He ran. Guards chased after him as he sprinted through the corridors. He had no plan, only the instinct to survive. A familiar voice suddenly whispered through his earpiece. Elias, turn left. Silara. He followed her instructions, darting through a hidden passage behind one of the massive palace tapestries. I've activated the palace's secondary security routes, Silara said. I can guide you out. Elias exhaled. Remind me to thank you later. Just don't get caught. He could hear the guards searching nearby, their footsteps echoing through the halls. Overus had set the trap. But Elias wasn't going to stay caught. Not if he could help it. A dangerous plan. Elias finally reached the outer palace walls. Silara was already there, waiting. How did you get here so fast? He asked, breathless. She smirked. I know secret ways you don't. He shook his head. We need to prove my innocence. Overus planted that data chip. Silara nodded. Then we need to find out where it came from. Elias exhaled. I'll bet anything that Overus has a secret meeting place, somewhere he plans things in private. Silara considered for a moment. There is one place. Elias raised an eyebrow. Go on. She hesitated. It is in the lower city, beneath the palace. It used to be an old command center, but it was abandoned years ago. If Overus needed a hidden location, he might be using it. Elias grinned. Then let's pay him a visit. Silara frowned. It's dangerous. Elias shrugged. So is standing here waiting to get arrested. She sighed. Fine. But if we're caught, I'm blaming you. He chuckled. Deal. And together, they vanished into the night. A shadow in the dark. Hours later, Elias and Silara crept through the dark alleys of the lower city. The air smelled of metal and damp stone, and distant voices echoed through the streets. Silara guided them with confidence. Even though she couldn't see, her hearing was sharp, allowing her to navigate easily. Finally, they reached the old command center. It was a large rusted structure built into the rock beneath the palace. No lights. No guards. Elias frowned. Are we sure this is the place? Silara listened carefully. Then she froze. Voices, she whispered. Elias moved closer to the building's entrance. Through the thin walls, he could hear Overus speaking. Once the human is gone, the princess will have no choice but to accept our leadership. Another voice responded. And what if the emperor resists? Overus's voice was cold. Then the emperor will be removed as well. Elias's breath caught. This wasn't just about him. This was a coup. Overus wasn't just trying to get rid of Elias. He was planning to take the throne. Elias turned to Silara. We need to get proof of this conversation. Silara held up a small recording device. Already recording. Elias grinned. Remind me to thank you later. She smirked. Just don't get caught. Elias looked back toward the building. They had the proof they needed. Now, they just had to make it back to the palace alive. Elias held his breath as he and Silara crouched behind a stack of old crates. The dim glow of control panels inside the abandoned command center cast long shadows across the floor. Inside, Chancellor Overus stood with several nobles and military officers. Their voices were low, but the recording device in Silara's hand was capturing every word. This empire has grown weak, Overus was saying. The emperor refuses to take action, and now he allows a human to challenge our traditions. A noble nodded. If we are to ensure Lutheri dominance, we must take control. But what of the princess? Overus smiled coldly. Once the emperor is removed, Silara will have no choice. She will be a puppet under our rule. Elias clenched his fists. He glanced at Silara. Her face was calm, but he could feel the tension in her posture. They had all the proof they needed. But now came the hard part, getting back to the palace. A desperate escape. Elias tapped Silara's shoulder and whispered, We need to move. She nodded, and they slowly began backing the way toward the exit. But then, CLANK. Elias's foot hit a loose metal pipe, sending it rolling across the floor. The voices inside stopped. Who's there? Overus barked. Elias grabbed Silara's hand. Run. They sprinted down the dark alleyways of the lower city. Behind them, footsteps and shouts rang out as guards gave chase. Silara moved swiftly, her senses guiding her through the maze-like streets. Elias followed, dodging obstacles and ducking into shadows whenever possible. But the guards were fast. And soon, they were trapped. At the end of the alley, a high metal gate blocked their path. Elias tried to push it open, but it was locked. Behind them, the guards approached. End of the road, human, one sneered. Elias gritted his teeth. They were so close. Then, Silara whispered, Elias, duck. Without hesitation, he obeyed. Silera pressed a hidden button on her bracelet, and a sudden blast of energy erupted from it, short-circuiting the street lamps. Darkness swallowed the alley. Elias felt Silera pull him forward. Climb. He didn't ask questions, just followed. He scaled the gate quickly, and Silera was right behind him. By the time the guards restored the lights, they were gone. The Emperor's decision. By the time Elias and Silera reached the palace, dawn was breaking. They rushed into the throne room, where the Emperor sat with his royal council. The nobles gasped at their sudden entrance, but Silera didn't waste time. "Father, we have proof," she declared, holding up the recording device. She pressed play. Ovaris's voice filled the room. "Once the human is gone, the princess will have no choice but to accept our leadership. If the Emperor resists, he will be removed." Gasps filled the chamber. The Emperor's expression darkened. He turned to his guards. "Bring me Chancellor Ovaris. Now." Justice is served. Minutes later, Ovaris was dragged into the throne room. He struggled against the guards, but when he saw Silera holding the recording device, his face paled. The Emperor rose from his throne. "Chancellor Ovaris, you have betrayed your empire, your people, and your emperor." Ovaris's jaw tightened. "Your Majesty, I only did what was necessary." "Enough." The Emperor's voice was ice cold. "You plotted against me. You sought to control my daughter. And worst of all, you tried to frame an innocent man." He turned to the guards. "Ovaris is guilty of treason. Remove him from my sight." The guards hauled Ovaris away, ignoring his protests. Elias let out a breath. It was over. A new beginning. The throne room fell silent. Then the Emperor turned to Elias. "You have saved my life. You have saved my daughter's future. And you have proven yourself worthy, time and time again." He stepped forward. "I made a mistake in doubting you." Elias shook his head. "You only wanted what was best for Silera." The Emperor nodded. Then, with a small smile, he turned to his daughter. "Silera, what is your wish?" She took a deep breath. "I choose Elias." A murmur ran through the court, but no one dared to object. The Emperor smiled. "Then it shall be so." He looked at Elias. "Captain Grant, welcome to our family." Elias grinned. "Happy to be here, Your Majesty." Silera turned to him, a soft smile on her lips. "You never gave up." He chuckled. "Of course not. I like proving people wrong." She laughed. "Then I suppose you are in the right place." As the court cheered, Elias knew this was only the beginning of his adventure, and he wouldn't have it any other way. The palace was quiet that evening, but Elias knew that danger lurked beneath the surface. The conversation with the old noble had confirmed his worst suspicions. Someone was actively working against Silera. And now, he and the princess had a name. Chancellor Ovaris. As one of the Emperor's closest advisors, Ovaris had power, influence, and control over many of the Empire's inner workings. If he was the one behind the conspiracy, then exposing him would not be easy. Elias turned to Silera as they walked through one of the palace's many corridors. "If Ovaris really is the one behind this, how do we prove it?" Silera's fingers traced along the wall as she walked. "Ovaris is careful. He won't leave any written orders or public commands against me. But people like him always make mistakes." Elias smirked. "Then we just need to find one." Silera nodded. "And I think I know where to start." A secret meeting. Later that night, Elias and Silera found themselves standing outside one of the grand halls reserved for high-ranking officials. The doors were closed, but Silera had heard whispers earlier in the day. Ovaris had arranged a private meeting with several influential nobles, a meeting that was not on the official schedule. Elias crouched near the door, pressing a small device against the wall. It was a frequency amplifier, something he had borrowed from the palace engineers. With it, they could hear everything happening inside. "The human must not remain," came a low voice. Elias glanced at Silara. That was Overus. Another noble spoke, but the emperor has accepted his success in the trials. To remove him now would be suspicious. Overus let out a quiet chuckle. You think I will remove him? No. I have something better in mind. Elias's grip tightened. There is an ancient law, Overus continued. A human is not truly part of the empire unless he swears loyalty to the throne. Without it, he is nothing but an outsider. A pause. And if he refuses? Another noble asked. Overus's voice turned colder. Then he will be banished. Silara inhaled sharply. Elias clenched his fists. They were trying to trap him. If he swore loyalty, he would be under their control. If he refused, they would force him to leave. One way or another, Overus wanted him gone. A dangerous choice. The next morning, Elias was summoned to the Grand Council chamber. The emperor sat upon his throne, looking calm but thoughtful. Silara stood at his side, her expression unreadable. The nobles were gathered, including Overus, who stood with a confident smirk. The emperor spoke. Captain Elias Grant, you have passed the trial of worthiness. But before you may continue as Silara's suitor, there is one final requirement. Elias already knew what was coming. You must swear an oath of loyalty to the empire. Silence filled the chamber. Elias glanced at Silara. If he agreed, he would be bound by Lutheri law. He would lose his freedom. But if he refused, he took a breath. Your Majesty, I respect your empire. I respect its traditions. But I will not swear loyalty to a throne I do not serve. A murmur ran through the room. Overus smiled slightly. Then by the law of the empire, you must leave immediately. Elias exhaled. You don't waste time, do you, Overus? The chancellor gave a polite bow. I am only upholding tradition. Silara turned toward the emperor. Father, this is wrong. Elias has proven his worth. The emperor's expression was difficult to read. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed. The law is clear, Silara. Elias looked at Silara. He could see the frustration in her face, the way her hands clenched slightly. He hated this, not for himself, but for her. He had come here because he believed she deserved a chance, and now, because of a loophole, they were trying to take it away. Elias wasn't going to walk away that easily. The countermove. Elias turned back to the emperor. Your Majesty, I may not swear loyalty to the throne, but I do swear loyalty to Silara. Gasps filled the chamber. Silara's lips parted slightly. Overus's smirk vanished. Elias took a step forward. If this trial was about proving myself, then let me prove it by my own actions. If Silara accepts me as her partner, then that should be enough. The emperor studied him for a long moment. Then he turned to Silara. Daughter, what do you say? Silara straightened. Though she could not see Elias's face, she could hear the truth in his voice. I accept him, she said firmly. The emperor exhaled slowly. He looked at Overus. Chancellor, is there any law that forbids the princess from choosing her own path? Overus's jaw clenched. He hadn't expected this. No, Your Majesty, he said carefully. The emperor nodded. Then my decision is made. Elias Grant may remain. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Overus's eyes darkened, but he bowed slightly. As you wish, Your Majesty. Elias smirked. Checkmate. A silent threat. As the council session ended, Elias and Silara walked through the palace halls together. That was reckless, Silara murmured. Brilliant, but reckless. Elias grinned. Hey, it worked, didn't it? She shook her head but smiled slightly. For now. Elias's expression grew serious. Overus won't stop, will he? Silara's smile faded. No, he won't. Elias sighed. Then we'll have to stay one step ahead of him. As they walked, a pair of golden eyes washed from the shadows. Ovarus was not done with them. Not yet.